Fluttershy let out a soft sigh as she lay on the floor of the examination room. A towel was draped over her head as she breathed slowly, trying to calm herself down and feel better. She had redressed her wounds. Her cuts had reopened in the water and they were slowly healing again. Her muscles still ached, and even though the health drinks had helped a lot, her shivering had gone away as well. A sign in her body temperature was returning to normal. She had a makeshift fire with some of the leftover gauze and bandages, using a small bit of lantern oil to help it burn. The fire had provided her with a gentle comfort, warming her body and calming her mind as the flames danced before her. It wouldn't be for the last long, but it was still serving its purpose. She had hung a bag over to help it dry, as well as getting all the water out of the music box. She was surprised that she hadn't lost the doll key in the watery mess, though the map of Ponyville hasn't fared yet as well. It was drying as well, though it would never be quite the same. I wonder where Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie are doing right now. Fluttershy asked herself while staring into the flames. She was feeling lonely without her friends, and she was starting to worry about their safety. This place wasn't welcoming. She already had brushed with death twice, and both times she had been saved thanks to Rainbow Dash. Rainbow Dash, she muttered quietly, closing her eyes to try to think about her mare friend. This is it! This is my chance! Rainbow Dash squealed happily as she held up a poster to Fluttershy. The Wonderbolts will be having an open auditions in 3 months. This is the first time they ever done this. Apparently, they've been so amazing at the talent of the upcoming flyers that they just want to see and personally invite the best of the best to join them. Rainbow Dash let out another squeal as she was practically dancing for joy. That's wonderful, Rainbow Dash, Fluttershy cheered happily for her. You'll finally be able to make your dream come true. Oh, I know, and I'm also going to have to pick up practice sessions. This is going to have a call on for some of the new tricks. Some new tricks that no pony has ever thought of. The most death-defying and out-of-this-world tricks has any pony has ever seen. Rainbow Dash instantly contemplated anything and everything that she could do. You shouldn't forget about using the Sonic Rain Boom either. You're the only pony of all of Equestria who could perform it, and they'd let you in for sure after they see that, Fluttershy happily said. Rainbow stopped her using her musing when Fluttershy said that. Lowering a hoof she had raised eagerly to the ground. The Sonic Rain Boom, huh? Rainbow scuffed in her hoof against the ground, looking a little anxious. What's the matter? Fluttershy asked, noticing the instant change in the behavior. Well, to be honest, I haven't been able to perform the Sonic Rain Boom since the Best of Young Flyers competition. Rainbow Dash seemed to be grimace at the mention of failing to do a move. Really? Do you not remember how to perform it? It's not that I forgot how I did, it's just, for some reason, things seem to get so real as I'm about to perform it. The ground gets too close, or I start to panic about not controlling my speed, or I just think something must be to perform only on a critical occasions, or... Rainbow Dash's frantic rant was suddenly interrupted when Fluttershy's lips found their way to Rainbow's. Rainbow's face lit up, in kind of a blush at this. I know you can do it, Rainbow Dash. I believe in you. Fluttershy smiled warmly at her mare friend. Well, I suppose I can always give it another try, Dash said, grinning. As she blushed heavily, she spread her wings and shot to the sky at mighty speed. Fluttershy smiled as she watched her, always loving the way Rainbow flew. Rainbow perched herself high up on a cloud, looking over at the world. With a quick breath, she sprang up into the air once more, flying around as she began to pick up the momentum. As Fluttershy watched her fly around, realizing Dash was getting a feel for the air at first, before Dash stopped flying high in the air, almost invisible against the sun. Then she saw the descent. Rainbow was racing straight for the ground in a tremendous speed. Fluttershy watched in anticipation as she could see Rainbow begin to form in the cone of air around her body. Fluttershy almost held her breath, and for a moment it seemed Rainbow hesitated, but Fluttershy could see the change in her flight. She put a hoof in her mouth, and out of hesitation, She might be able to go flying backwards, as she had so many times before. But at last moment, it seemed to be a last ditch of determination in her eyes, and her body stretched forward, and suddenly, boom! Another explosion ripped through the sky. A circle of color spreading out as a rainbow shot towards the ground, turning right before it could impact with the ground with the rocketing to the sky, spreading a giant rainbow across the sky. Fluttershy cheered, jumping up and down at the amazing sight. Wait a moment! An explosion! Fluttershy's head had suddenly popped out from where she had been laying it on her hooves. That one woke me up earlier. It sounded like a lot like Sonic Rainboom. Now she was worried. What could Dash have for doing the Sonic Rainbow here, huh? Useless. Oh no, was Rainbow Dash being chased by the dragon again? Fluttershy's heart started pounding. She could be hurt, or trapped, or worse. Her heart had lodged in her throat as she quickly stood up, shaking her head to try and clear her mind as her towel fell to the floor. No, I can't think of that way. Rainbow Dash is okay, and I'm sure Pinkie Pie is too. I just have to find them. Fluttershy looked around what remained of the fire before her. It was flickering with the last of its embers, and it would soon die out of very soon. Okay, I should be dry enough for my things to be dry enough as well. It's time for me to find a way out of here. I have to find my friends. Fluttershy quickly placed her things back into her slightly damp bag. She made sure to pack the extra gauze, bandages, and health drinks as well, making sure she had more than enough medical supplies with her that should anything be happening along the way. This would have to do for now. She closed it up the bag and placed it back on her back. She then returned to the lantern around her neck and turned it on, making sure that it still worked before walking out into the hallway. Instantly, the music box began to hiss and wail with the sound of buzzing bees. As the air seemed to become thick, Fluttershy instantly had to struggle for breath, as it felt like the air was pressing down hard against her body, trying to struggle out the life out of her. Her body felt almost frozen as the pressure, it felt like it was trying to crush her body. Her head slowly turned, looking around in the half hallway where it felt like pressure was emanating. Her eyes had grew wide, and her pupils had shrunk as she could, seeing the two piercings and the red eyes staring back at her. It was a tall pony-like creature, one that easily overpowered her. Its body was covered in darkness that seemed to flow and crawl around it, almost like the cracked dancing flames. As it stared, her mouth began to open, revealing a white mouth in its stark to contrast its black body. Its jagged, sharp teeth bared for her to see. It was grinning at her. It began to walk towards her, each step echoing aloud with a thud in the hallway. As it drew closer, the air grew thicker, and its presence seemed to crush much further. Air pressing down on her, making her legs shake and her breathing as her heart stopped, pounded heavily on her chest. As it grew, a word began to echo through Fluttershy's mind. Pain. This creature would bring her pain. She had to run from it. She had to get away from it. Put her hooves and felt like it was glued in her place. Why couldn't she run? She had to run. If she was going to die if she didn't run, she was paralyzed by the fear. Fear of what? The wrath of this creature? That's what she had to run away from. I need you to be strong right now, all right? Fluttershy's mind snapped back to reality, instantly turning on her hooves and running as fast as she could. She was finally able to get the air into her lungs as she quickly ran past the doors around her. The hallway was quickly coming to an end, though, and before she could see the staircase to the second floor, she couldn't stop. She had to run. Her hooves heavily hit against each step as she ran up the stairs. She seemed to be getting far away from the creature, and the air was breathable, and she wasn't feeling the soul-crushing the presence. The music box suddenly growing more quiet. She reached to the top of the stairs, panting as she took in the stale air. The world still smelled of mildew and rotting materials, but it was better than being in the creature's presence. She quickly began to walk down to the hallway of the second floor, when her music box suddenly began to hiss again. She stopped in her tracks, expecting the black creature to appear before her. But slowly, coming into the view of the lantern wasn't the black creature. It looked like a nurse. It was wearing the standard Cloudsdale Hospital nurse uniform, a pink hat with a red cross, and a pink coat that fit well, and around her body just ended sort of like the flank in the cutie mark that could have been seen. With the white stockings on its hind legs with the special made hoof sandals to keep their steps quiet for patients. However, that's where the similarities ended, for the face of the nurse was covered in bandages, hiding in its eyes and its face, but around its mouth was a metal muzzle with holes for air, but it looked like it had been placed there to keep the creatures quiet. Its uniform was covered in spots of blood, as if it attacked something, while its white tail seemed spotless. But the most striking of all was what it's around its neck. It wore what looked like a black necklace, living the flames, as if it really came from the body of the creature formed from before. Her music began to hiss louder as the creature grew closer. Her head looked back and forth, looking for a way out that didn't involve going back the way she came. Her eyes fell upon the double doors just in front of her right. She jumped at the doors and pressed on them, praying that they were open. The doors swung open as she ran inside, closing the doors behind her. The hissing of the music box died down, and she could tell the creature was nearby outside the door. She hoped it wouldn't come breaking down the door, but now she realized that she had just set herself up in a trapped room. She had jumped into what looked like a supplies closet. However, most of the supplies had fallen into this world's rotten despair. Moths flew around it in the ceiling of the room. She could smell blood in the air, but she couldn't see any. She then looked around, seeing if there was anything that could possibly hide her or keep the creature behind the door away from her. Something glinted against the glare of the lantern on one of the shelves. Huh? She slowly walked over to the glint of light. It was an orange gemstone in the shape of an eye. It was the only thing in the entire room that hadn't fallen into a state of rotting. In fact, it looked like pristine, as if it had been taken care of, while everything else fell apart. Something about the gem drew Fluttershy into it, as if it was hypnotizing. The jewel itself seemed to be watching her. She gulped down her beating heart and placed the gem carefully in her bag. She'd hold on to it. She felt like it was important. She suddenly walked over towards the door and placed her ear against it, trying to hear anything. The hissing of the music box had gone silent, and she didn't hear anything past the door. She opened the door carefully, peeking outside and looking around. The nurse had left. It didn't seem like it had to chase after her, and the break of her door down. Fluttershy let out a soft sigh, relief realizing this. She exited out of the supply room and continued down the hallway from the direction the nurse had came. She felt very strongly about not returning the way she just came from. Moving forward was her only option now. Fluttershy looked around carefully in the doors of the hallway. Many had been boarded up with wooden planks nailed to the frames, making sure that no one could enter or exit out of the rooms. Many looked like they'd been sealed with some kind of building material, while the others just looked like the locks and handles had been broken for ages and wouldn't open. The hallway ended abruptly with a turn, Fluttershy turning it around to continue down the hall. Something immediately struck her in her eyes as she walked down the hall. She drew closer to it to get a better look at it. When she stopped, she stared in surprise. On the wall of the opposite doors was a giant mural of Princess Celestia. She was facing the pony, looking at the mural with her hoof raised as her wings had spread out with the imposing look about her. Above the mural, in large letters, looked like a quote that she had said once. "Life is the right of every pony. May we all bask in the light together." Fluttershy blinked in the awe of the mural. She had never seen it before, not in all those years that she has been in the hospital at least. Not to mention something struck her as being odd about the mural, as if something was missing. Her eyes are missing, in their place of the intimus in the wall, looking as if something was supposed to be placed inside of them. Fluttershy carefully pulled out the orange stone she had found in the supply closet and carefully fitted it into the right eye socket. The stone fit with a click and stayed in place. Now Celestia was only missing one eye. It was likely the other eye was somewhere in the hospital. Suddenly the note came from the desk and sensed to her. They had locked it away the other eye somewhere because Celestia's staring was judging them. As with the mural itself could see something that they didn't want to see. Fluttershy put a hoof in her chin and thought, I must have to find a way where they locked the gem away, and the only hint I have is the word hide. Fluttershy looked around in the dark hallway once more, before quickly setting back down on the hallway she was heading. She looked even closer at the doors now, looking for any door that might have some sort of keypad, or be open for her to check to see what could reveal some sort of kind of locked in them. Even after another turn in the hallway, none of the doors revealed any answers, before opening up to another staircase, leading back down to the first floor. She treaded carefully, expecting another creature to start heading for her if she wasn't careful. The world remained quiet though, as she came upon the hallway that she recognized from when she was a filly. It was a testing wing hospital she only remembered frequently with her mother as she was getting help. In quite nostalgia, she began to check some of the doors in the hallway. One door opened for her as she walked inside. "Mother!" came the voice of a little filly. Fluttershy stepped back in shock as she looked at what was happening before her. A ghostly version of her mother was lying in her bed in the hospital room, as a filly version of herself ran up happily next to her bedside. "Fluttershy, you came to visit here again," her mother chuckled happily, leaning down to pick up her little filly, hugging her close as she lay in the bed. "Of course, Mother. You know I'll always come and visit you." Fluttershy chuckled happily as her mother's hair tickled her. "When are you coming home, Mother? I miss you." "As soon as the doctors finish the testing today," her mother smiled happily. "Really?" Fluttershy's face lit up happily. "Really?" her mother chuckled, happily at her daughter's enthusiasm. "They said unless it's serious, I can head home today, since I'll have your father at home take care of me. We're so lucky to have him," she smiled. "Dad's the best doctor in the whole wide world. He'll make sure you're better in no time." Fluttershy smiled happily. "Indeed he will." Fluttershy's mother smiled happily, before turning to her bed and coughed into her hoof, away from her daughter. "You really should be resting," came a deeper voice. The two girls turned to see an older Pegasus, with a doctor's coat, walked in the room. "Daddy!" Fluttershy smiled happily. "Hello, dear," her mother smiled happily. "Hello, you two," he smiled, then walked closer. "How are we feeling today?" "Better. My stay here helped, but I'm eager to get home and be with my little one," Mother said, rubbing her head happily. "You'll be resting here too, you know. You may feel better, but you're not cured yet. But we'll find a cure, don't worry," her father smiled. He looked tired, as if he hadn't gotten a good night's sleep in a long while. "I know you will, dear. We'll be a happy family again before too long," her mother said happily, before images faded away. Fluttershy didn't know what to make of the images. After they had gone, the room had turned into a state of decay, as the rest of the hospital was in. The furniture and cloth was destroyed and old, and the smell of mildew hit in her nose. "Mother," Fluttershy said quietly. She remembered that memory now, though she had tried to remember it before it was hazy, but now it was coming to her in clear as it could be. She wondered what the reason of the memories have for hiding her mother until they showed up like this. She took a closer look at the room, but nothing else seemed to pop out of it. She frowned a little, hoping that she would find a little more to remember, but it didn't seem to be offered any. She slowly turned back to the door and walked back into the hallway. She let out a soft sigh as she tried to gather any thoughts to try and calm down. She walked further down the hall before her eyes caught at the sight of the sign that was lit up above the double doors. The sign read ER. She hesitated for a moment. She hadn't gone in the ER section of the hospital before, and she was worried about what she would find. However, she gulped down her fears as she quickly entered the double doors. She looked around, not seeing any creatures, but the scent of blood had caught her nose. She looked down on the ground and saw a trail of blood leading down the ER's hallway. As if something had dragged the pony's head down it, her gut told her that following the trail was the right way to go. But she dreaded what she would find, and she didn't want to see a bleeding corpse. With another gulp, she began to follow the trail of blood. The trail led under a door and at the end of the hallway. A door would look like it was used for surgery. She carefully pushed open the door, walking into the room. It was indeed another room for surgery, torn apart from the privacy curtains hung from the rusted metal rails. A window for the observation room was broken on the other side of the room. A tray filled with rusted medical items lay near a broken table. Various machines and devices lay in various pieces around the room. The disinfecting sink was coated with layers of blood. The blood trail ended in the middle of the room, leading to a large pool of blood that just lay underneath the surgical table. On top of the table was the wooden blood-stained box with a padlock on it. The padlock had a dial on it for turning numbers on it. Fluttershy carefully walked up to the box and examined it, before noticing a bit of blood on the table that had been formed into words. Turn the letters into NHMBLYRS. The last word was smudged, but it has been written in blood, but she was surprised that it wasn't all more smudge. She carefully placed a hoof against the padlock and then looked at the 4 dials on it. Each dial went from 1 to 9, creating a 4-digit number code to unlock the box. The note said that the code word was hide, and the word said something important about turning the letters. Fluttershy thought quietly for a moment while trying to tell her brain what it meant. Suddenly, it seemed to come to her now. As she placed her hoof against the dial, began to turn the numbers. 8, 9, 4, 5. She let out loud as she turned the numbers, and she all thought it must be the right combination. The padlock clicked, releasing the iron grip against the wooden box. Fluttershy smiled happily at her own indigenousness before carefully moving the padlock aside to open the box. Inside, she saw what she expected, another gem that was Celestia's eye, though this one was dark of a shade of blue instead of the orange that her other eye was. Fluttershy carefully put the jewel inside of her bag, ready to leave the surgical room. She turned and exited the room, only to be met with a loud hissing coming from the music box once more. Her head instantly looked down in the hallway, seeing the same kind of nurse heading towards her, blocking off the path of the hallway. Fluttershy looked around, not sure what to do, not wanting to get attacked, but having nowhere to run. She did the only thing she could do. She pressed herself up against the wall, and with that, she very slowly began to walk towards the nurse, hoping the nurse would ignore her and let her slip by. The nurse's head turned with a snap, look at Fluttershy, as she was almost side by side by it. Fluttershy stopped in her tracks as the nurse stopped as well. The nurse seemed to be staring at Fluttershy, though, through its bandaged face. Fluttershy couldn't see its eyes, but she knew that something was staring deeply at her. Fluttershy started to back and return. She could feel a cold sweat beginning to form in her forehead. The two of them were in a standoff, and Fluttershy didn't want to be the first pony to make a move. The tension was thick, but only cut off by the hissing of the music box, telling Fluttershy that she was in danger. The nurse finally, but slowly, turned its head away from Fluttershy before walking past her, heading for the surgical room Fluttershy had just left from. Fluttershy let out a soft sigh from the air as she'd been holding from the tension. The nurse had turned around instantly, as it suddenly lets out a wailing, ear-piercing cry. Fluttershy jumped, running out of the ER hallway as fast as she could. She then turned down the testing hallway, running straight for the stairs onto the second floor. When the music box hissed over louder, and she could see a wall of thick air that squeezed down her as if it was trying to suffocate her. She had skidded to a stop as her whole body felt terror. The dark creature was standing before her once more. It roared at her while its mouth opened, jagged teeth coming down swiftly. Fluttershy's instinct reacted as she raised a hoof to defend herself. A jagged teeth bored down her leg, and Fluttershy let out a scream in agony, as it felt like her flesh was on fire. The creature's twisted head, before finally quickly snapping it back, picking it up and tossing Fluttershy by her leg. Fluttershy slammed it onto the wall, her air escaping her lungs as the pain soared through her. She coughed and gagged in the thin air as the dark creature began to walk closer to her, wanting her to strike out her once more. Fluttershy scrambled to her legs, her injured legs slipping, causing her to crash face to the floor. Exhaling another yelp, her bruised face was stuck. She managed to run her head to look at the creature, though. Blurry, tear-filled eyes. It was drawing close, and she had to escape. She had to get up and run. Instinct struck again, as her wings spread out as she flapped them desperately, trying to pick up her body to try and get away. She had to get a Merle of Celestia. Jagged teeth bore down her wing. Fluttershy screamed even louder than she had before, her sensitive wing being punctured in several places. The dark creature twisted its head again, though this time a loud crack was heard as the bone in her wing snapped. Fluttershy's body flailed once more as her screams echoed throughout the hallway. The dark creature let go of the aimed wing, seemingly to grin and happily in its accomplishment. As tears streamed down her face, her legs finally broke the traction. She then used all of her strength and focus on running, wanting nothing more than to put the distance between her and the dark creature. Her vision was blurred with pain and tears, making it hard to see where she was going. She smacked into the end of the hallway, crying in pain as it shot through her body. From the force of the impact, she shakily looked down in the hallway, seeing the blurry outline of the dark creature before heading straight towards her, continuing in a slow pace. She reached out and her front hoof out and found the door with her. With their haste, she opened it, stumbling out. She quickly blinked, whirling her head around as she was on the other side of the lobby. She knew where she was going, and she could go through the other door. To make it up to the stairs, and then all she could get was to the Merle. Her music box was yet to cease its hissing, as a figure came into the blurry vision. Fluttershy turned and ran, only looking back to see the blurry outline of the nurse that had been walking towards her. She tripped against the receptionist's chair and laid scattered behind the desk. She didn't have any time to let out the pain settled in. She had to get up. She scrambled back down to her feet and reached for the other door. The moment she entered the hallway to the patient's room, another ear-piercing wail cried out. Fluttershy turned, and just barely in time to see a nurse raise up on two hind legs as the front legs came rushing straight for her. Fluttershy felt the hooves strike her face as she was sent tumbling back to the wall. She panted as she got back up and tried to look around. She could no longer see out of one eye. The only half-world came to her vision. She made the image out of the nurse walking towards her, barely even giving her time to realize she had been hit. Fluttershy pushed off against the wall, ran past the nurse, barely wailing at her as she ran by. She could barely see, her hoof hit in the staircase with a thud, sending her face first into the stairs once more. Her head was throbbing so much that she wasn't even sure what was happening to her body anymore. She only knew that she had to get up and keep running. She had to get to the Merle. It was her way out. It had to be her way out. She climbed the stairs to the second floor. She wasn't sure how she did it, but she had managed it. She kept running. She wasn't even sure how she was kept running in pace with her body, but her legs were running. She made a turn down to the second floor of the hallway, and a blurry image of the Merle was in sight. She ran straight for it, skidding to a stop right before it. The music box let out a loud hiss and the air began to thick. Fluttershy reached in her bag and pulled out the blue eye. The air began to feel like it was pressing down on her, going to crush her body. She fumbled with the eye, fumbling to put it back in the right slot. It nearly fell from her hooves as she shifted hastily into her place. She couldn't breathe. The air and the pressure was so strong she swore she could feel the breath on the back of her neck as the blue gem clicked in its place. The two gems let out a bright light cry as a loud cry came from her side. The Merle began to move, disappearing into the wall, in its place on another dark hallway. Fluttershy ran for it. As she ran through the hallway, ran away from the pressure and the thick air. It was chasing her. The creature was following her down the hallway. Her chest was once on fire more, but she couldn't stop. An office had opened up at the end of the hallway. A simple office. A desk, a filing cabinet, chairs, office space. Fluttershy crashed into the desk, throwing her hoops over as she panted in desperation. Her vision was impaired so much now, she could only make out the outline of the furniture of the office. The air grew thick once more. She turned her head in fear, watching the dark creature was drawing closer. Its blood-covered white smile, jagged teeth teeth shone underneath its red glaring eyes. She couldn't see anything but its face. Her breath sounded so loud. Her panting was as loud as the beating of her heart and ears. There was no escaping this time. The Merle had led her to a dead end. There was no escape now. Her vision was filled with the dark creature, and it was going to kill her. She would die here, and her friends would never know what happened to her. She muttered an apology under her breath, as her face continued to be drenched with tears. The creature was upon her, and her breath stopped. The pressure of the creature's presence was enough to make it like it stopped her heart. It opened its mouth, and it was going to bore down its fangs on her one last time. It stopped. The creature stopped moving. Something had forced the creature not to kill her. Fluttershy meekly stared at the creature, not understanding what was happening. It had the opportunity to kill her. Why wasn't it taking it? Her ears twitched as if some reason. Something in the distance, a siren was going off. The dark creature began to disappear, as if the siren had called it forth and summoned it back. The darkness that surrounded the creature's body seemed to be burning up. The entire creature went up in black fire before her, disappearing before it could finish her. The music box ceased to hissing, and the creature vanished, leaving her in the office by herself. A loud click could be heard before the sound of something crashing to the ground. Fluttershy's mind was hazed over. She could barely see, but she couldn't understand what was going on. But she dragged herself over to where she had heard the sound, and her body moved on its own now, without her guidance. Her body felt as a step on top of a platform, one that she wasn't sure had been there when she entered the room. She felt her body collapse on top of it, laying herself down as she panted. The platform began to move. She wasn't sure how or why, but she didn't care. It was moving up. It was taking her away from the hospital. The platform was moving up to the ceiling, through a dark path that she couldn't see what was around her. But she knew she wasn't around any danger anymore. The pain was becoming real to her now. Her face had come to her attention first. She could feel the swelling around her eye, and it was probably also bleeding a lot from the face, but it was hard to tell. Her leg was no longer useful. Using it so heavily in her panic state while she was injured, it had gone completely numb to her. She had probably done the irreversible harm to it. She probably would never work the same way again. She could barely make out any blood pouring from it. Her wing. The creature had snapped her wing broken. She couldn't help but remark on it. The Pegasus wing was strong and sturdy, but not one would normally break it with a twist of its head. They weren't like bird wings that were fragile, but they were strong enough to lift the entire body of a pony. But hers now was broken. She wasn't sure if it could be fixed or not. The only thing she knew about broken wings is that they could break in two ways. In a way they could be used again, or a way they could never be reusable again. There was very little in a leeway. Her thoughts were distracted when the platform came to a stop, and it had reached its destination. She panted heavily as her body wanted to stay collapsed. Absorb the pain. The pain was trying to drive her mad. The only thing that was keeping her insane was the thoughts of the damage that had been done to her and what she could do to fix it. She knew that she had to at least get up. If she didn't get up, and she wouldn't start fixing her wounds. She tried to stand up and put her energy to her legs, but they refused to have her stand her up. She carefully blinked her one reusable eye, trying to open that she was in, but it refused against her actions. She tried to flap her good wing, but it pressed so hard against the platform of her body. She panted, but she was too tired to panic anymore. She was yelling at herself to get up, but her body was refused now. Oh man, that was a good one. Pinky giggled happily. Fluttershy's eyes closed tightly, wanting to escape the pain with the sleep, but she forced it open. Oh man, you pull the best pranks, Pinky. Rainbow Dash laughed, alongside the pink pony. Her good front leg weakly off her body lifted, as she carefully placed her hoof against the ground. Hee hee hee, that was pretty funny. Fluttershy giggled, covering her mouth with her hooves. Her legs started to lift the bottom of their body up. Her body jerked in refusal, but she held herself up. Her back legs began to weakly move now. I told you enjoy yourself, Rainbow said, grinning and putting a hoof over Fluttershy's shoulder. Her back legs slowly moved, placing her hooves against the ground. She lifted herself up and she was standing again, but she could feel herself dripping. She was losing blood. It's all in a good fun after all, Pinkie laughed, bouncing up to Fluttershy. After all, who doesn't love to share a good laugh? She grinned brightly. On free legs, she began to walk. She didn't know where she was going yet, but she could feel the need to go forward. You're right. I'm still not sure if I'm good at them, but I still love doing them with you. Fluttershy smiled happily. She loved being around her friends, and they gave her such strength. She didn't know what to do without her friends. Fluttershy stopped before a mirror. She could see herself now. She could see the all bruised and half herself up, eye was swelling around, and the maimed wing with a bleeding leg. She was in a mess. With very careful precaution, she dropped her saddlebag onto the ground using her good hoof. She opened the bag and pulled out a health drink. She very carefully swallowed the bitter contents before placing it down. She then grabbed the bandages in her bag and very carefully began to wrap the wound on her leg. I think that's enough for one day, but we should totally do this again, Rainbow Dash grinned at Fluttershy. Oh yes, I'd love to. Doing this again would make me really happy, Fluttershy grinned happily. She could ask for nothing more than to spend another day in the loving care of her friends.